Okay, Danielle, I've already started the recording, so anytime that you want to begin, it's 10 o'clock.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Danielle. I'm going to be beginning this webinar for us today, Building Resiliency Through Health and Wellbeing. We hope to give you guys a wealth of information today. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. We do ask just to maintain the speed of our bandwidth and to minimize distractions. We ask that you keep your cameras off at all times. You will also be muted. We have some presenters for you today. I'm going to be doing an overview of the CalTAP, and I'm also going to be passing it over to Merlene Steinbeck. She is our local interagency network coordinator, as well as having a speaker from US Vets Outside the Wire, Nicole. After we go through all of the presenters, we'll have an opportunity for you guys to go ahead and ask any questions about the material that was presented to you today. You can ask those questions to CalTAP questions. We'll get those recorded and we'll either address them directly in the chat or we'll go ahead and wait for the Q&A for those. So here's a few instructions for the chat. You should have received that when you registered. Kirk will go ahead and send you a message in the chat so you can see where it pops up, but please feel free to utilize that during the presentation. My name is Danielle Tran. I am an Army brat. I am enjoying honoring my father's service, my grandfather's service by continuing to serve veterans. I am a CalTAP training coordinator. I'm just going to do a quick overview on what our program is. So what is CalTAP? We're designed to inform and connect veterans of all eras to their earned state and federal benefits, and we do that through our 5 pathways: core curriculum, education, entrepreneurship, and employment. And our 5th service providers pathway is really for those who are also serving vets. We want to make sure that they have the tools to be able to help you guys the best way that they can. Here is our veterans resource book. Again, it's exactly what it's called, a resource book. We'll be able to send that to you in the chat. You also should have received a link to the document when you registered or when you got the Zoom link. This is a wealth of information. All the things that I'm going to be covering over just very, very briefly here today, you'll be able to find in great, great detail here in this resource book. So here's where you'll find us on the Calvet website. That's calvet.ca.gov. CalTAP is on that main section. And once you're on there, you can get access to those 5 pathways like I mentioned. But I also want to point out that we have been having a host of webinars, and we do have these archived on our website. So once you're clicking on that archive link, you'll be able to get access to some of the webinars that we've hosted since April of this year. You'll also be able to get a copy of the PDF presentation. Today's presentation is being recorded, and you will also have access to the PowerPoint after. It usually takes about 24 to 48 hours to get posted on our website. It's Friday, so it'll probably take a little bit longer. So once you're done, if you had to step out and you missed any information or you want to share it with a family member or friend, you'll be able to do that once the weekend has passed. So how can you use CalTAP online? So going back to that pathway to our main page, I'm going to select core curriculum pathway. And on there, you can see there's a bunch of modules that you can go on at your own pace, get access to all the information that I'm talking about today. I'm going to be focusing on your California benefits. And once you're in there, you'll be able to pull up documents such as these. It's a PDF document of all of the information that I'm going over today. You can click on the links it's going to take you to get more information or directly to wherever you can go to apply for certain things. But again, like I said, I'm doing a brief overview. So you're going to make sure that you're checking out either your resource book or these websites in order to get the details of this information. So what are your California benefits? Chapter 1 in your veteran resource book, or again, this is a PDF document of what it'll look like on our website. So we start with the college tuition fee waiver. This is for veteran dependents, your spouse under certain plans, children and stepchildren, and it's going to go ahead and waive tuition and fees at state-funded schools. That's the UC, the CSU, and the community colleges. And you can use this fee waiver depending on which plan you're using, all the way up to the doctorate. And it's saving veterans, over $35 million a year. And the DMV programs include having veterans put on your driver's license. And we have this so that way you're not having to carry around your DD-214 in order to get access to benefits or discounts that they offer to you as a veteran. You also can get honoring veterans put on your license plate. Again, you can do that to honor other members of your service or honor a family member. And then you may be able to qualify for a motor vehicle registration fee waiver. For the outdoors activities, we include a fishing and hunting license. You get a reduced annual fee for that. And then you can get a no-cost use of all state park passes. For our tax programs, we have disabled veteran property tax exemption. And again, you would apply for that through your local county assessor's office. And then the same, you would apply for business license, tax, and fee exemptions also through your local county. And then for opening your own business and doing business with the state, you could be certified as a stable veteran business enterprise program. CalVet also has home loans. So this is the State Department of California doing some financing for you to be able to own your own home. You can use your VA home loan guarantee in combination with this home loan. We do have a webinar coming up where you can get great and more detail on this program as well. Our CalVet Women Veterans Division, they provide information, advocacy, outreach, and support to women veterans. And I'm going to take you real quick through their website. This is where you can get access to more information. You can email them, call them. They also have a women's veteran roster where you can go ahead and submit your information so that you can stay up to date on all of the information and resources that they are sharing. Our Minority Veterans Program is very similar, doing information, advocacy, outreach, and support. They also help veterans get citizenship and naturalization services. Here is their website. They also have an email and a phone number where you can contact them to get more information. CalVet has 8 long-term homes that offer a variety of services from assisted living all the way up to independent living. Each home offers something a little bit different, but those locations are out throughout California, so giving you an option once you're a little bit older if you want to live amongst veterans and also get support and care. There's also 3 state cemeteries, so you can be interned here in addition to the national VA cemeteries. You give a little bit more options again throughout California where you can be interned and honored for your service. I'm going to go over a few common veteran websites that we just always want to make sure that everyone's very aware of. As a veteran, you may have this information already, but it's always good to be reminded of how important it is. So the first one that we're going to talk about is va.gov. We strongly recommend you using this website because VA sometimes is changing a lot of the information and they don't go out and notify the state agencies. They don't go out and notify you of when they've made changes or updates to some of their benefits or the names of certain programs. So you want to make sure you're really familiar with this website where you can go and manage your healthcare, your disability, your records, things of that nature. So we strongly encourage you to use this website frequently. eBenefits is another great website where you can apply for benefits and also manage those, get updates on your claim status and things of that nature. You can manage your health. You can do some prescription refills here in VA appointments, but for most of the healthcare side, we do strongly encourage you to use My Health eVet. This website has gotten to be really popular, especially right now with COVID-19. If you have VA healthcare, you're probably having a lot of your telehealth appointments through this website. You're doing prescriptions, getting those refilled, setting up your appointments to this website. So it's again, it's a really great website for you to be using. So again, that's my information. I said it was an overview, very brief. We really want to get to the meat of the program, but we also want you to be aware of what your benefits are as veterans here in California. So please feel free to email me if you have any questions that don't get addressed in the chat today or later on. We're always here and open and willing to support you guys. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Merlene. She is your local interagency network coordinator, and she's going to be talking to you about what she does.
Good morning. My name is Marlene Steinbeck. I am the local interagency network coordinator for the Inland Empire. I do know this is probably for the Central Valley. However, she took a little leave for some personal reasons, but all of us work very well together and we all can fill in and help each other out. Can I get the next slide, please, so I can show them what we're doing here? This is our 8 different regions. So my region is the Big Red area. I believe we're talking about the Central Valley. Each of us have specific regions with networks. We are local interagency network coordinators. So what we do is we coordinate with various different networks. We analyze gaps in services towards veterans, and then we look for agencies to bring together to fill those gaps without additional cost to the state. This is so important. There are so many resources out there for veterans that they just don't know about. Next slide. Everybody has a specific thing that they do. We all of us reach out to service members, veterans, and their families. We make referrals and work directly with the established service providers and networks. And we assist with local emergencies. For example, the LAC that was in Porterville recently, our Central Valley Link was there for most of the time. I came up for 3 days of that. However, we also provide leadership and advocacy to the local communities. Most of the time, Calvet will be on site. They know all of the agencies there. They can make a call. They can pick up the phone and just call somebody directly in any of the department. Next slide. So we also have connections in other agencies, obviously, that we're all state agencies. We have connections at EDD. Annette, for example, came over from EDD. She is the Central Valley Link. She does such a great job connecting people with unemployment benefits and job development. There are so many things going on at the American Job Center. I've learned so much on how to look for a job myself that most of this information is not available to the general public, but the veterans specific have reps at each of the job centers. We also connect directly with the county veteran service offices. And of course, we work here at Calvet, so we have connections within Calvet, and we have direct connections at the vet centers and the medical centers and clinics. Next slide. So that's my presentation. We do, like I said, we are available. If you have questions, we can direct and we can connect you and do a warm handoff. Go ahead and introduce US Vets. Nicole?
Thank you, Marlene. So I am Nicole Souders, licensed marriage and family therapist with US Vets. US Vets is the largest nonprofit organization serving our veterans, reservists, and family members of any veteran or dependent in the United States. We are a full nonprofit organization, so all of our services are completely free for veterans and any dependents or family members needing services. We cover support with mental health, housing. We also provide career development support and also work with CalVet and CalTAP to do webinar presentations like this. So I'm going to go ahead and get started for today. This presentation is called The Comfort of Addiction. So pretty much the question we might ask ourselves when we're trying to understand addictions and how they correlate to our health and our well-being and our everyday lives essentially is, how do I know the difference between letting go of something that hurts me so I can hold on to something that helps me? So I'm going to answer this question in several different ways in the slides following this title. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So before we get any further, I always want to make sure that we are able to break the information down so that we really are all coming from the same perspective when understanding these types of questions or concerns. Now, I do want to acknowledge that if you are seeing today's presentation and you go through all this information and you think to yourself, I've never had an addiction, I don't see myself having one anytime soon, that is completely possible. However, it is also pretty rare these days for us not to know someone, whether it's a friend, a significant other, a fellow service member that we've worked with, or a significant other, or a sibling growing up, or an aunt or an uncle that hasn't struggled with an addiction or an addiction with mental health disorder, or you may only have anxiety or depression. So how do we understand all the aspects of this, even if it doesn't 100% apply to us? Even just getting that understanding to help those that we love and care about and are in our lives can also help us help them. So first of all, what is an addiction? So there's several different types of definitions that are out there. I want to try to make this as understandable and simplified as possible. So an addiction is a psychological and a physical inability to stop consuming a chemical, a drug, or a substance, or the inability to stop engaging in an activity, even though it is causing us psychological and physical harm, meaning that we have negative critical thoughts related to it, or we have physical symptoms that are causing us another type of pain. So that's essentially what it means. One of the myths about addictions, I have here, things like exercise are quote unquote healthy. They are a healthy addiction. It's okay to have that, but if I drink or I gamble, that's not good. That's a bad addiction. In actuality, any substance or behavior can be part of our life in a healthy way or in a unhealthy way. So recognizing that the term addiction recognizes that a behavior or a substance that we're using is actually creating a secondary harm. So the primary is that we see it as helping in some way, and the second part is that it's causing us a side effect of harm. And I'm going to break that down a little bit more because when I say it's helping, sometimes people will look at me and go, how can an addiction help you? How can using drugs or drinking too much actually help me? I don't understand that. But for those of us who've ever had an addiction to a substance or engage in a behavior, there's some type of support that that behavior or substance is providing us that most people outside of ourselves are unable to see that. They only see the harm. So I'm going to break that down a little bit more. So hopefully that provides another type of perspective so that we can help others. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what types of addictions are there? Generally, we hear about substance addictions. These are going to be addictions that are pretty well spoken of: alcohol, marijuana, things like that. And what they do is they provide us a desired effect. Usually they inhibit our thinking to an extent. So for example, if I'm feeling very stressed, very worried all the time, and I come home from work, or I log off of the computer if I'm working at home and I have a drink, that might relax me. I might feel like, okay, I can separate my stress to relaxation, and one drink may turn into two, which could turn into three, because the more that we have something, the more natural it is for that tolerance level to become increased. So then we need more consumption. Now, we don't generally talk about the addictions that are considered a process addiction. It can also be termed a behavior addiction. When we mention behavior, it's a lot easier to remember. So these types of addictions don't appear to have control as to when or how long or that we choose to engage in them. We just find ourselves doing them. They involve repetitiveness and the high frequency of engaging in this behavior a lot. So I'm going to show you what process addictions look like, so that seeing how we might have a lack of control with so many behaviors right now may not seem very understandable, but when we get into the examples, it will make a lot more sense. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So here are the examples. Clearly, these are not all of the substances out there that one could engage in or have an addiction that they suffer with. However, these are the most common, especially in the United States. So alcohol, tobacco, opioids, so that could be, pain. A lot of times we'll hear about, athletes, even in high school or college, or even in the military, you have a significant injury, you hurt your knee, your elbow, something tears, something breaks, you have to get surgery, you have a lot of pain, and you're prescribed pain medication. And it's very common that if we have pain medication, we become comfortable with having that alleviation of the severity of the pain and the discomfort, and we recognize that that feels comforting or it feels less painful. It's one less thing we really have to worry about. So sometimes you'll see that we might continue to ask for prescriptions, or you get prescriptions from somewhere else, but pain medication is actually extremely common nowadays. And unfortunately, when we're using a substance so significantly, and we're not always completely aware of the harm that it can cause, someone could have a drink or two of alcohol and take several pain medications and have an accidental overdose. So it's also being aware that the term addictions does have a significant harm to us and those that use them, because although it's comforting and beneficial to have relief from pain, we don't always think about the second step that could happen. So I really just kind of wanted to bring that awareness because it's very common, and people sometimes wonder, how does someone have an accidental overdose? That would be a clear example of that, because we're trying to alleviate from pain physically, possibly even emotionally or mentally in addition. When combining things, difficulties arise, and sometimes if we can't stop that or don't have the support, it could lead to death, among other harm. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So here are some of the most common examples of what we call a process addiction, or I had terms in the other slide, behavioral. So as you can see here, we have eating disorders, we have sex and pornography, plastic surgery, seeking out pain. And so opposite of what I had just mentioned, some people trying to alleviate themselves from pain from an injury, possibly in sports or in the military in training or in combat. There's also sometimes people who seek out pain. And as you can see here in the smaller print, it says types of self-harm, cutting or burning. These are actually extremely common in adolescents and young adults. Typically is where we see self-harm, and a lot of times family members especially will ask, I don't understand why my child or grandchild or younger sibling or sister or brother would want to cause themselves harm. A lot of times the seeking out of the pain actually provides a sense of comfort because you feel pain, and to that person, pain does not equal pain how it would for someone not under a substance or having an addiction with a behavior. That pain turns into comfort. And so generally a person that's engaging in that has already had a significant amount of emotional and mental, if not physical, stress, possibly trauma, just a lot in their life, to where we once would see pain as a harmful, pain feels good. So really recognizing that our behavior addictions or process addictions are extremely common. I also have here love relationships. These are like our codependent relationships where we rely so heavily on another person or a relationship that we are unable to even sometimes do daily things. We can't run an errand alone. We can't make a phone call. It inhibits our ability to just do natural day-to-day things, which can also lead to emotional, mental, psychological, physical abuse, which is a whole nother topic. But we also here on the right side column, we have shopping, work. A lot of times we might joke about workaholics. However, it actually is legitimate to have an addiction or behavior addiction to work, because if you also look at these process addictions, there are benefits to them. So by engaging in a behavior, I'm getting a certain outcome that is helping me as the person suffering from the addiction. However, if I'm a family member, friend, a fellow service member, I may look at this person and go, why are you doing this? Look at all these things. You've had to be in the hospital. You've had to go to therapy. You've had to go to treatment. You got divorced. You lost your children. They don't want to talk to you. Like, all of these addictive behaviors you're doing are causing all these impact. Why would you continue to engage in it? Just stop. However, the difficulty is with addictions is once we have one, regardless of it being a substance addiction or a process behavioral addiction, it's not so easy to quote unquote stop. So what I really also wanted to highlight in these process addictions here that are listed is how common these behaviors can be. And many people can engage in shopping and work and have exercise and play video games and have relationships, and not be an addict or have the reason for what they're doing is because of an addiction. However, these behaviors can also be very common for people who have maybe once suffered from alcohol and then end up having an eating disorder, or vice versa. Someone recovers from an eating disorder and yet eventually turn into someone needing alcohol or marijuana constantly. One can kind of trade in for the other, so to speak. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So one of the things you might be asking is, what is the actual difference or common factor between a substance addiction and a process addiction? They are essentially the same. They impact us as human beings the same way. It's just the action is different. One substance is going in and creating chemical differences within our brain and body, and a behavior process addiction, the behaviors are sort of creating that connection for the addiction. As we engage in it, the brain has the same sort of green light that goes off that it would as soon as the substance entered the body. So let's try to see if I can break it down a little bit. A person using substances is concerned about the support they receive from the substance. Meaning, if you're extremely stressed and you smoke marijuana or have several glasses of wine, that's going to give you a sense, hopefully, that person is thinking of calm or relaxation, or inhibiting them from overthinking all the stresses and worries that went on earlier in the day or maybe the next day. So they're perceiving a benefit from that. Now, a person engaging in a behavior is also seeking support from that behavior. And as they continue to engage in that behavior, they see the results of that support. For example, if someone is orthorexic, which is related to eating disorders, but in the former slide, if you remember, orthorexia is related to exercise. So this person is going to be someone who focuses so much on the types of food they eat. So how healthy, quote unquote, is the food? How many times a day am I exercising? How many calories am I burning? How high is my heart rate going? It is so detailed and so focused that this person's perception of their world is surrounded by how much they exercise, how quote unquote healthy they are, what they're inputting, how that's working. And a lot of times with someone who's orthorexic, you'll see a lot of these behaviors. You'll see the difference in their behaviors if they are even willing to go to a restaurant, or I maybe should say now takeout from a restaurant, depending on where you are in California. But recognizing this person is going to be so consumed and specific and anxious and overwhelmed. Their behavior is, I'm losing weight, I'm getting healthier. That is what's spurring on that type of addiction, for example. Now, the other thing to recognize is that both of these, whether it's a process behavioral addiction or substance addiction, this person is going to be consumed to the point where it feels out of control, especially if you're a person on the outside, and you're witnessing or observing this, or you rethink someone's behaviors or comments over time, they're going to be planning, engaging from anything related to this addiction, or they're going to be trying to recover from the negative secondary side effects. So if they start to have heart palpitations, or they start to lose their hair, lose their teeth, specifically talking about an eating disorder or someone who might have orthorexia, there's a lot of medical conditions that can happen as a result. And so they're trying to work through those. However, they may not see the full connection between their addiction and the negative side effects. And a lot of times this is where loved ones will try to intervene and provide support and highlight these negative side effects. But it's extremely difficult for someone who is suffering from the addiction to recognize that these negative side effects are in any way more harmful or not worth the risk versus the support that they're perceiving that they get from engaging in this addiction. So it's extremely difficult to try to just use like quote unquote logic or reasoning with someone who's in their addiction, because they're not going to have the same perspective as us, because there's things happening with the brain, which I believe would be the next slide. If we could go to that one, please. Okay, we're getting there. So you may be asking, well, how do addictions even start? What is the susceptibility that I have as a person to have an addiction? Or you may be thinking about your children or a loved one, and you're going, okay, none of us engage in these behaviors. I think we're pretty good. However, we still always would like to know how things develop and how they start and how susceptible we are. So recognizing that when the urge to take a substance or engage in a behavior hijacks the brain, which is primarily going to be part of the prefrontal cortex, it's also termed all of our executive functioning, which makes our decisions. It also relates to the reward behavior and provides benefits for our body. So it essentially shuts off all of our thinking for quote unquote reasoning, and lets us know that we just need to focus on the emotions that I'm getting from this substance or this behavior, meaning I'm feeling a sense of comfort, or I'm feeling relief from pain, or I could also be a person who's looking for pleasure or excitement or something opposite than the stress and worry and negativity that I'm feeling in my life every day. So recognizing that I'm either trying to go towards pleasure and reward, or I'm trying to go towards a relief from pain, a relief from stress, and looking for comfort or something along those lines, depending on how you look at day-to-day things and how you're able to identify stress and things like that. So recognizing as the chemical enters the brain, it can cause people to lose control of their impulses, which is what I mentioned by that prefrontal cortex. When someone develops an addiction to that substance or the behavior they're engaging in, their brain is losing the ability to fight those impulses because there's a reward. Like I mentioned, that reward is either going to provide comfort and relief or pleasure and excitement, depending on what your reasons are for engaging in that substance or behavior. And a lot of times, if you're in an addiction or you ask someone in an addiction, they may not connect. Oh, I'm trying to get away from pain, or I'm looking for pleasure. That's not always how we see things as someone engaging in an addiction. We're just doing things to us in some ways that seem like a natural day-to-day thing. That may sound a little strange, that an addiction could be a natural day-to-day thing, but it's more what we're getting out of something that we tend to focus on. For example, if you're watching like your favorite TV show, you, depending on if you're a Netflix person or an Amazon Prime person and you're seeing that, oh, I have 5 series here, or 5 seasons of a series on here. Oh, I love the show. It just makes me laugh all the time. You know what? I'm going to watch a second episode. I don't have anywhere to go today. And pretty soon you've watched 5 episodes in a row, and it's 3 hours later, and you're going, oh my gosh, where did the time go? But you weren't necessarily focusing on, okay, I have this much time, this many episodes, that's all I'm going to do. You were more focused on the comfort or the humor or the laughing experience you got from being able to just join and enjoy that rather than think of all these other things. So similarly, that's kind of how an addiction works for someone. We're really not dealing with a lot of awareness in that moment because it's so hyper focused on the comfort or the relief or the joy that we're getting from that behavior or substance. So essentially, where we go. Okay, the reward signal being sent to different areas in the brain that are stimulated to feel the relief or the comfort or the pleasure. Essentially, this equals the absence of any negative feeling, whether it's a physical pain or an emotional pain or a mental pain, which, if you break it down, are all really related and mixed in there. This creates the need for more. And so that's a lot of times when people go, why can't you just stop? It's not easy. And if you're the person engaging in an addiction, you might even ask, why would I stop if I'm getting any type of benefit? We don't always look at the negative side effects, but at times we look at what benefits am I getting. And so it's extremely difficult to think, oh, well, there's a couple negative here. A lot of times we would question, but there's positive. So it's extremely difficult to work through addictions. If we could go to the next slide, please. So you may be asking, based off of the title of today's presentation, with our mental health and well-being, how does this relate to an addiction? So I really wanted to make the connection to highlight, especially with what's going on in the world, within the last 10 months with the pandemic, and just a lot of the things we've also seen in our country, with a lot of violence, stress, turmoil, loss of jobs, a lot of what appears to be lack of empathy at times, and just lots of questions that a lot of people have brought up over the last even 10 months, 6 months alone. So people have these questions. And so it's important to recognize how our health and well-being can be related to an addiction. And so recognizing that there's been even more research lately as the number of suicide and number of addictions and people being admitted to treatment centers has skyrocketed in the last 10 months. It's extremely important to understand what connections there are between the two so that we can either differentiate between my anxiety, my depression, my stress, versus the reasons why am I going to have several bottles of wine at night, or why am I suddenly smoking or playing video games until 4 a.m. These things are questions to ask, or you may be thinking of asking these questions of a family member or friend, coworker, fellow service member, those sorts of things. So as research has really become more prevalent and advanced over the recent years with mental health and addictions, they have noticed a significant connection between co-occurring mental health disorders. And that may sound like a very huge word to articulate and kind of break down, and I'm going to do that in 1 second. But it's also found that with co-occurring conditions of an addiction, in addition to a mental health disorder, it can make your addiction and your mental health disorder worse. So some of us may only suffer from an addiction, some of us may only suffer from a mental health condition, and some of us have both. So how do we work through that? And how are they connected? And do they benefit or do they make it worse? And research here shows that when you have both, it makes it extremely difficult for that person to manage either one, an addiction or a mental health disorder. So just imagine how hard that has to be for someone to try to recover from an addiction or to work through the obstacles that are already happening with their mental health. And I'm going to break it down a little bit more for you guys in this next slide. If we could go to that, please. Thank you. So I also want to break down the term co-occurring. So co-occurring is a clinical psychological term. You may hear the term comorbidity or someone has a dual diagnosis. Essentially, this just means someone has either a physical disorder, a mental disorder, or a substance disorder or a behavior disorder. It essentially means someone has more than one from these different groups. So if we were to look at the most common types of mental health disorders that are related with those of us who have addictions or are extremely susceptible to addictions, these are going to be your list right here. So we have anxiety, major depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, conduct disorders, which a lot of times we see starting in adolescence. So conduct disorders are going to be what you might hear someone being diagnosed in late elementary school or junior high. They'll say, oh, they have oppositional defiant disorder. And a lot of times that really would look like someone who has no understanding, regard, respect, or value for authority. So someone who might be breaking the law a lot of times. If that understanding of law and order is not there, as it is for the majority of us. And recognizing that's a mental health disorder. We also have post-traumatic stress disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is actually becoming more and more prevalent and diagnosed in adults these days, because the awareness of how these behaviors work, they're seeing that many adults weren't diagnosed as children or adolescents, or what they thought was an attention deficit disorder, because they look different in boys and girls, and then as we become adults they still look a little different. So they're becoming diagnosed in adults more commonly lately. And so recognizing that with these mental health disorders, if you look at them and you know anyone who's had one, or you may have one that you're suffering from, these are also extremely genetic. And when I say extremely genetic, I essentially mean that they are in our genes a lot of the time. So they can be passed down recessive traits. From a parent or a grandparent or a great grandparent. And so a lot of times the most common ones would be major depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, and attention deficit disorder. Those are probably your 98% of them being genetic. So a lot of times someone who may become diagnosed or start to have symptoms of it may go, I never had problems when I was a younger adult or a teenager. I had all of these things happen in my life and I was totally fine. And now I just can't handle anything. So recognizing that you may have a predisposition, which means you're more susceptible if it's in your genetic makeup in your family line from either your mom or your dad's side. And that's the same thing with addiction. Addictions are genetic, meaning that there are certain genes on our RNA, DNA strand that carry. So if you have a family member who's ever had an eating disorder or an alcoholic or anything like that, whether it was an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, grandparent, great grandparent, that stuff is also genetic. So a lot of times we are fighting our genetics, but also recognizing that it's not a lost cause and that you can 100% recover from an addiction, and you can decrease the symptoms that you have from a mental health disorder. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So how can I develop a mental health disorder? So aside from the genetics that I mentioned, there also are several things that happen to us over the course of our life that can have a bigger impact than just our genetics. Or it could be in our genetics, but maybe something hasn't happened enough in our world or in our relationships or in our life to really trigger that gene. And then it's like the perfect storm, and not a good storm because that happens. So there are excessive stress that can actually cause a mental health disorder, any type of trauma. And I do want to highlight that trauma, there is not a clear checklist for what a trauma is or what abuse is. Yes, there is a definition for abuse and there's a definition for trauma, but I also want to just make a quick note that trauma and abuse are really defined by that individual person's experience. So if someone was verbally abused or assaulted or harassed, possibly in the military, someone else they talk to and tell them all these examples, the person might be like, what's the big deal? Suck it up. Like everybody gets called names. But that's not actually true, in the sense that just because one person may shrug something off does not mean that it doesn't have an impact on someone else, or that it doesn't cause harm because one person wasn't as negatively impacted. Each person has a different threshold for what they can withstand. And that is physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, and over the course of their lifetime. So if something is hurting someone or impacting them emotionally, mentally, physically, and that could be being called names or the way they were treated in the military, that is considered a trauma for that person. Trauma and abuse is not defined because one person wasn't impacted negatively by it. It is each individual person, their experience and how they've withstood that or suffered from that, then that's considered a trauma or abuse. So I just wanted to make that note because a lot of times people will try to rate the severity of something and say, oh, well, that happened to me too, or I had to deal with that, so it's not that big of a deal. That's not how we determine trauma or abuse. If it impacts you negatively, mentally, emotionally, physically, relationally, then that's starting to get into the realm of, is this trauma or abuse? And you can kind of siphon that further if you have a therapist or a counselor. And then there's physical or sexual abuse, living in a war zone, in unsafe environment, neglect, poverty, or any negative experience our brain has difficulty processing. So recognizing that someone may come to you and let you know they have a traumatic experience, whether you agree or not, whether that's traumatic is not what this is about. It's that that person identifies it, and that's the side effects, experiences they're having because of that. And that makes it more susceptible for someone to have a substance addiction or a behavior addiction along with a mental health disorder. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So you may ask, how do I begin treating my addiction and my mental health disorder or disorders? Or if I have a loved one or a coworker or a sibling or a child that I'm trying to better understand, how do I make sense of this? I want to get them help, or possibly people have been telling me I need help. What do I do? How do I go about that? So one of the really great things, which is depending on how you look at it, is that because of the prevalence and common increase of addictions and mental health just within the last several years, but really within the last 30 years, There has become even more research and studies and awareness and really training for clinicians, medical doctors, to become aware of the signs and symptoms of an addiction or a mental health disorder, or even a physical disorder that could result in therefore having depression, and then that could lead to an addiction. So recognizing that there's more awareness and acceptance that these things, although there's definitions for each of these categories, nothing is just cookie cutter or just fits one person in one group. This is something that impacts all of us as human beings. And so as a result of that, there's more openness, understanding, and empathy for helping people who are suffering from at least one of these, if not multiple, experiences. So recognize the signs and symptoms of what it may be if it's an addiction that you may have had in the past or have, or possibly could be leaning towards. From there, do you find yourself wishing to have less physical pain? Do you want to have less stress? Or are you looking for more happiness or adventure or excitement in your life? Being able to answer those questions are probably one of the most fundamental things in understanding a addiction or a mental health or even a physical disorder. And a lot of that is because we always want to know why. However, why is probably one of the most complicated questions to ask anyone. Even if you say, why is that your favorite food? I don't know why. It just tastes good. So we don't want to ask why. We want to be a little bit more specific. And then if we understand if for any reason someone is self-medicating, in trying to lessen the physical pain they experience, or the emotional pain they experience. Maybe they recently lost someone to suicide and they just decided, they didn't even really think about it. They just started drinking a lot. If you get some type of benefit from that substance or that behavior that's lessening the emotional or physical pain you have, why wouldn't you do it? And that's the difficulty. Asking why questions doesn't help, because when you say, why wouldn't you? Most people would say, yeah, if there's a benefit, that makes sense. So it's understanding what's beneath the why. And when the most common way to see someone suffering from both an addiction and co-occurring disorder is to see, okay, they're trying to get away from stress or pain, or they're trying to get towards comfort or happiness or excitement. That makes sense. Now, how do I lift it even more and see what else is going on? That's how we really get a greater sense of being able to empathize with one another, and also sometimes ask ourselves what's going on, which are extremely difficult to do with others and ourselves, especially if we're talking about a family member or significant other, and we're talking about mental health, physical health, or an addiction, or all three, and you had any of those things in the list before that I had mentioned, of an unsafe environment, being in the midst of war, or a type of trauma, or added stress, or a loss of a loved one. All of the things that happen in our lives make it so much more difficult. And so sometimes it's easy for us to sometimes have denial, or we sometimes become blind to the things that are right in front of us. Not always because we're intentionally trying to ignore or not care for others, but sometimes because it's so painful. We naturally, our body, our brain is extremely intuitive that way and helpful, but that's questionable, because it's trying to help us not feel the pain or experience what's going on. And as a result, we can be blind to things right in front of us for years sometimes. So if we could go to the next slide, please. One of the things that I think is extremely important to recognize especially depending on the type of years that you served in the military, or if you're on this presentation and you're thinking of a family member or a loved one, or a grandparent, you might be going, maybe those behaviors they did were just part of that era. Like, that was just how it was in the 50s and the 60s or the 70s. Everything was just more out there, and why wouldn't you use that? However, a question that I wanted to present, which could be a difficult question to ask if you, depending on your perspective, but can the military culture impact my susceptibility to an addiction or a mental health issue or a physical issue? And so some of the things I just wanted to present up here are facts, are research that I found, which I thought was really interesting. Because like I had mentioned before, sometimes substances are, more present, or they're easier to access if you're in a different country, or depending on the years that you served, and maybe there wasn't a lot of research, so drugs didn't seem to be as legally unacceptable or unable to get. It was easier. And so because of that, if you have physical pain from an injury in the military, it makes a lot of sense. But I also just did want to point out one more thing on here. So in the K&C rations back in World War II, they used to put cigarettes in there, sort of as like a feeling of like, hey, here's something to help, or here's like a little extra. And sometimes someone might think, okay, well, I don't really want like food or a book. Yeah, a cigarette seems like a nice thing. I'm gonna relax, we're gonna sit there and we're just gonna talk and have a good time. Like, yeah, you know what, hey, let's have a smoke. But recognizing that there were also different things in our history, in the military culture, that shows us how we could become more susceptible to just the naturalness and acceptance of these things. Because if it's seen as just a comfort or reward or thank you, why would we have used it? Or why wouldn't your grandparents have used it? So recognizing sometimes the subliminal message that we're getting before we understand the harmful side effects, it just seems natural. So why would we question that? So this is more of just a historical slide, just to provide a little bit of insight. If you're thinking of certain people or yourselves and wondering how the culture is different, or what things are more talked about or not, that can provide a different type of susceptibility to a mental health disorder, or because of my physical injury, I use that substance to provide comfort and relief. So maybe this was a slide to provide some type of insight or answers for someone specific. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So you may be asking yourself now, what's wrong with me? If for some reason you were in this presentation and you thought of all of these things that were quote unquote wrong with you, I do want to let you know that none of us are perfect. You are human with a beating heart, and it's extremely difficult to go about life and try to find things that can provide us a sense of solace or comfort without having some type of negative impact. And so that's really one of the things I wanted to highlight in this presentation about health and well-being and addictions, is recognizing is how do we find the things that are going to provide support, comfort, relief, or joy and excitement to us, but not have a negative side effect. If you're experiencing worry or fear, it's natural. It doesn't mean that it is comforting by any means, but it's natural. Wanting to seek relief from any fear or worry can just naturally, because we're people, lead us to feeling overwhelmed daily. That's also natural. Having a sense of escape from distress, even though it may be brief, the behavior or substance you're engaging in or know someone to be engaging in is sometimes all we need. Sometimes you'll hear people say, or you might hear yourself say, oh my gosh, I just need a break. Like, I just need time to freeze, or I just need a vacation. I just need to physically get away or mentally get away. Those types of thoughts and feelings and comments are a lot of times the things that lead us to engaging in a behavior or substance. And sometimes, depending on where you're at, you may be a person who's having loved ones comment about your quote unquote bad habits. Why are you doing that? Why are you doing this? Why? No, you need to do that. Also recognizing that you may feel like you can't get a break, you can't escape. So that extra relational stress can add another type of susceptibility. And recognizing that you're not alone in your family unit, in your household, in your work circle, you may feel like you're alone. You may feel like you're the only one working through stresses and difficulties. However, this is natural and it's a common experience. It doesn't make it okay or acceptable that you're having to live a life with all of these extra responsibilities and burdens. However, there is hope that you can get through this without having to use a substance or a behavior that can cause harm. So that's one of the things that's extremely important for you to know. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So if you are a person who has ever thought about recovery, or you are in recovery or have been in recovery or know of someone in recovery, it is also extremely natural that especially at the beginning of attempting your recovery, that there may be slips, trips, and lapses, which means you may go back to that behavior once or twice. You may have a really tough day and feel like I've tried everything else, every other coping skill that doesn't work. I just need to do this one time for 1 minute and I'll be okay. It's natural. And just because those moments happen does not mean it's impossible to recover. Recover from a substance or a behavior is possible. It's 100% possible. Is it easy? No, but anything that's super easy, we're not going to value or appreciate, which sounds somewhat harsh, but it's true. And if you've tried to work through that, you know the importance of respecting and valuing and appreciating yourself, and feeling like that really is important at the end of the day for you, even though we don't think about that every day. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what can help with managing the difficulty of having an addiction with a co-occurring mental or physical disorder? So trying to support yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of the things that provide you a sense of comfort in substance. And also breaking it down hour by hour, day by day. We are living in times that are extremely trying, that no one else in any other era or generation has lived in. Yes, others have experienced trauma, abuse, war, loss of loved ones, but where we are in this time, in this day and age, is extremely rare and different. And so we are all more susceptible to suffering from all of these addictions, mental health, or physical disorders. So being able to try to spend every day doing something you're good at. And when I say that, I mean something like, if you like knitting or sketching or painting or cooking, doing something like that. Or if you can't do it every day, can you do it once or twice a week? Being able to separate the day-to-day nuances with something new and comforting and exciting that brings a sense of value and talent to you is much more valuable at the end of the day than just having a sip of something or engaging in a behavior on your computer. These things will provide you comfort and appreciation for yourself, and have you change your perspective in a deeper way that highlights your mental health, your physical well-being and being able to target and lessen the addiction, whether it's behavioral or substance. So also being aware of your feelings. Sometimes it may be easier to get into counseling or therapy or do a support group, or, you know, depending on if you have an adolescent you're thinking of, maybe doing like a youth group at church or doing something like that to provide a sense of connection, but also empathy and understanding from people similarly in our age group or belief system outside of our day-to-day life is extremely important. And even if it appears small and quote unquote insignificant to someone else, it doesn't matter. If it has any type of value or worth to you, even if it seems small, then it's important to you. And you are what matter in order to help others and to let them know that they matter. If we could go to the next slide, please. So other ideas for supporting my co-occurring disorders, know your triggers. When I say triggers, I mean what sort of things add natural stress to your daily life? What sort of people in your family add extra stress? What issues or comments or things at work create a sense of panic? Knowing these types of things are extremely important. Contact your emergency support system. Who are those people? Do you have at least 2 or 3 people you can rely on? It's okay if one of them is a therapist, a coworker, a best friend, someone that was in your unit, 10, 15 years ago. As long as you have those people, it's important. If you don't have those people or you don't feel comfortable yet talking to those people about a certain behavior or time in your life or how you've recently gotten through stress, I believe there was the crisis line that was posted on this. Reach out to that. We also have a phone number at US Vets Outside the Wire for our counseling services, and that number is 888-556-9993, and I can input that in the chat in a couple minutes as soon as I finish this, for anyone who may not have it. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. There's the contact information. If you're needing support or thinking about maybe doing counseling, we do provide services in LA County and Orange County. If we could go to the next slide, I don't know, there might be one more. Okay, perfect. So here's all the contact information for everyone. I guess we're at questions then. Thank you all so much for hanging on and letting me talk a little bit over. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Yeah, we are at the point at the end where we're ready for any virtual questions that anyone may have. Kirk has been running the CalTAP questions chat function. So if you guys have sent anything to him, he will be available to go ahead and help us go through those right now.
And thanks, Danielle. We don't have anything, no questions in the chat as of yet. Please, if you do have any questions, type it in the questions. If anybody did not get any resources that I had posted, whether it's the resource book or the survey link or the link map, please let me know and I will post it again in the chat. So there's a question, are these benefits available to dependents?
I think that might be for Nicole. That's a great question.
So the way it works for us working with dependents, if we're talking about one-on-one counseling, that would be, is there like a support that we can provide to that dependent that is helping them work through this, that is in the family system? For example, do you have a teenager that lives in the home with a veteran and they're needing support handling things? That is services we can support. We also just make sure that when we are kind of doing our intake, and whether it's a veteran or a dependent, what are the sort of things that we can provide help with? If we don't feel like we are the best service, if there's someone who's more specialized than us, we can refer you to other resources. However, we are available for career development, counseling, support groups for dependents and veterans.
Awesome.
So hopefully that wasn't too confusing.
Thanks, Nicole. Awesome. So while we're just peering in the chat real quick, I just want to go over a little bit about our upcoming webinars. Like I said, we are continuing to do whatever we can to make sure that we're getting information out to you guys. So this is a quick outlook of the webinars that we have here for the rest of December and some of the ones that we are having available later on in January. You should be able to register for these on the Eventbrite page the same way you registered for the event for today. If it's not posted there just yet, just know that we're working on it. These are things that are on our calendar. It just takes a little bit of time to make sure everything gets live, get all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. But please know that there's lots of great information that's going to be up and coming for you guys to participate in. And then finally, I'm just going to show the resource phone number that you guys can go ahead and contact to get into any questions that you guys might want to have answered. This is where you can reach out to us. So Kirk, do we have anything yet?
There was some personal information from Alejandro Castillo about partnering with Calvet in this type of webinar before. In regards to that, please call our 800 number and we can reach out to you, or please put your email in there and we can get back with you and address it with our managers and coordinate something of that nature. We can, there is no other questions. I can put the survey link one more time in there as a benefit for everyone to please provide the survey information.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Again, we really appreciate you guys being here with us today and sticking around, even though we went over a little bit longer. We just want to make sure that we're always giving you guys the best and the most information that we can. We hope that you guys stay safe and have a happy holidays if we don't see you on our webinar again. Again, just take care and thank you for being with us today.